In a pretty shocking development, the Warriors went and got Dennis Schroder in a trade, giving up Melton and some second round picks. And essentially, that's all that was involved. The Warriors still have everybody on their roster except for Melton. And Dennis Schroder's name has been floating around for quite a while, and there have been plenty of Warriors fans that have been interested in Schroder. And this is a very interesting player for the Warriors in terms of him being a replacement piece for Melton. And we saw what the team looked like when Melton was in that starting lineup. That's when the Warriors really started to figure things out. Their closing lineups looked super viable with him in there. And because Melton was more of a combo guard than a pure point guard, you could slide him next to Steph Curry and the defense still looked really good with him being a POA at the shooting guard spot. From an offensive standpoint, Dennis Schroder is simply more capable than Melton, but he is a point guard. He is a true point guard. He's not a shooting guard nor a combo guard. I don't see him being a combo guard. I see him being a point guard. And that's where the difference is between Melton and Schroder. To be able to recognize and understand versatility of players' positions, right? And that's where there's some question marks when it comes to Dennis Schroder. If the Warriors elect to, let's say, for example, close games with Schroder at the point guard spot, then you know what happens. Steph Curry will now have to shift over to the shooting guard. And that's the thing that if you're a Warriors fan, you don't want to see. Steph Curry is 36 years old. He's going to be 37 soon. And this is not a guy that you want to stick at the shooting guard spot, forcing him to guard the likes of Devin Booker, Anthony Edwards, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, guys like this, right? You know, I'm looking at this from a regular season standpoint, as well as what would happen if they went with a lineup like this in the playoffs. You got to have a certain amount of size, especially to close games. And, well, obviously last season, that was a huge part of the issue with Chris Paul. And Chris Paul, if they just simply used him as a backup point guard, he would have been an amazing fit for the Warriors. Unfortunately, Steve Kerr and his broken brain has a tendency to embrace the tiniest lineups imaginable to humankind when it comes to nonsensical decisions in the NBA. And that is the same concern that I have now that Dennis Schroder is on board with the Warriors. Theoretically, this is a fantastic move for the Warriors. Now they have a super legitimate backup point guard because Pods has not really been able to fulfill or carry that role. You know, at least not in terms of championship caliber. And ultimately, that's what the Warriors are looking for, right? Championship caliber two-way players. One thing I will say about Dennis Schroder is that he is a dog, man. Defensively, this guy will hound you as a point of attack defender. I think he's actually better than Melton in that regard. But like I always like to say, every inch matters in the NBA. And well, Melton is 6'3" and Schroder is 6'1", and that will matter in certain matchups. And again, when you combine that 6'1" Dennis Schroder and 6'2" Steph Curry and put those guys together, and then think about what Steve might do in terms of the rest of the forward spots, right? This would be a different story if Steve would actually use a big next to Draymond and just go with a bigger lineup. I could see that lineup being more viable if that's the case. But if he decides to go with like this Wiggins, Jonathan Kuminga, Dre lineup, now you're going to be once again pretty much small across the board. And then combine that with the possibility of Steve Kerr wanting to run the motion a bunch of times with those small lineups, well, that's where things are going to look really funky and the non-viable lineups will continue. And that is and has always been the concern when it comes to the Warriors, is the fact that Steve Kerr is the decision maker. And it's just really hard to trust him to make the right decisions for this team. Even offensively, will he allow Dennis Schroder, assuming that he's going to come off the bench initially, will he allow this guy to thrive with the ball in his hands? Because Dennis Schroder is not a motion player. He is a true point guard. He needs the ball in his hands to do what he does best, and he needs a bunch of screens to create the space and the openings to maximize his potential. He's not some off-ball movement shooter guy that you try to maximize with the ball out of his hands. The only way this move becomes viable is if Steve Kerr relents and let go of some of his ideologies and let the individuals of this team thrive and help his team look better than what it's been, because of his continued insistence that the players be great for his system rather than allowing a system that lets his players thrive. And you can make the argument that Dennis Schroder has had a career year with the Nets. His shooting splits are 45, 39, and 89. Finally, the Warriors have another player who can actually make his free throws. So that's another added bonus. I do appreciate the fact that a move was made It's just that when you give Steve Kerr these tiny toys to work with, well, he has a tendency to maximize the opportunity to go as tiny as humanly possible. And honestly, that is literally my only concern. Dennis Schroder for the Warriors front office going and getting this guy was theoretically a great move. You've turned a guy in D'Anthony Melton who's essentially no longer on this team and flipping that into a starting caliber point guard and somebody who's capable of being a dog on defense. I mean, honestly, that is wonderful news for the Warriors. It should be. But can Steve Kerr get this right? Can he organize the rotational patterns in a way where it makes sense? I mean, really, that's the biggest question of all. And now that they've added yet another piece back into their rotation, will Steve go back to running like a 12-man rotation instead of cutting this out and cutting it down and getting some guys out of the rotation so that more guys can be in rhythm and the Warriors can start to develop some new chemistry with this brand new piece? The other thing is that it's really good that they made this move early. The earlier they make certain moves, the better it is for this team because it gives them more time to gel. It gives them more time to figure out the most viable combinations and rotations without trying to figure it out with only maybe a couple of months left in the season. To be honest with you, now that Dennis Schroder is on this team, there really isn't a whole lot of room for a guy like Potts, who's been struggling for a chunk of the season, to get much playing time. They need to maximize the fact that they now have two legitimate ball handlers in Steph Curry and Dennis Schroder and make sure that you bolster the defense around these guys as much as possible. That is the most viable path for the Warriors to get back to a trajectory of winning a whole lot of games and not yo-yoing back and forth between being an awful team versus being a great team, depending on what type of offense they decide to run. So there's a lot of questions that need to be answered, and well, hopefully we'll see it soon enough. I'm semi-excited, but more on the nervous side, to be honest with you, because I've seen this movie already when it comes to a tiny lineup, a tiny point guard next to Steph Curry, which also, by the way, Steve has a tendency, hey, we have another point guard on the team. Let's minimize the effectiveness of Steph Curry even more and put him at the shooting guard spot. And hey, let's park him in the corner even more now that we have another ball handler. If you guys remember what Steve said about Steph Curry last season, man, he put the ball in Chris Paul's hands, turned it into a Chris Paul team to close games. And then he was like, oh yeah, well, I think Chris Paul is going to be able to unlock Steph Curry. Unlock Steph Curry. You know, that's the kind of nonsensical disrespect that we've seen over the years from this guy. And that is why I have apprehension about the situation. Let's see how it goes. Let's hope for the best. And whatever else we need to solve as the season goes, we'll cover as needed. If you like this content, be sure to subscribe, hit the notification bell, the like button, all the good stuff. Until next time.